A Musical Life with guitarist and entrepreneur David Hart. David Hart is the developer of the G4 guitar method, a method based on his 2 decades of teaching and opening schools throughout Australia. David's G4 method not only teaches students the 7 essential skills of guitar playing, it also teaches teachers how to become entrepreneurs and open their own schools, as evidenced by the 50 franchises of the G4 guitar method around the world. Welcome to A Musical Life. I'm Hugh Sung. For most musicians, sales is a dirty word. Art and business are concepts that mix about as well as water and oil in their minds. But for David Hart, the business of music education is all about helping students succeed in becoming better players and teaching teachers essential entrepreneurial skills to grow and keep their student base. David himself learned to play the guitar in the early 1980s and spent many years performing on the Australian music scene in various cover bands as well as solo performances as singer and songwriter. David discovered his passion for teaching at an early age, opening the first of several guitar schools in Australia back in 1987 and launching his G4 guitar method back in 2005. If you're a music teacher struggling to find or retain your students, no matter what instrument or genre of music you're in, you're going to find this interview enlightening, inspiring, and practical. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Hugh. Great to be here. Fantastic.
And I believe I'm speaking to you all the way on the other side of the planet. You are in Japan. You're in Kyoto, is that correct?
I'm currently in Australia, actually, but yeah, we
Oh.
do reside in Japan. But right at this minute, I'm in Australia.
Oh, okay. Well, you're still pretty much on the other side of the world.
So it's still, yeah, I'm on the same timeline, just further away.
Wow. Well, we're going to get into what brought you to Japan in just a bit, but I want to start off better understanding your early years. Now, as a classical pianist, in the classical tradition, it's in many ways it seems to be very, very structured, particularly along the career path, and maybe not so much so for pianists, but certainly for orchestral instruments. Um, a violin, cello, trumpet, whatever, what have you. Most of these orchestral instrumentalists, they look forward to graduating from school and then either auditioning to hopefully win a job at an orchestra or pursuing other degrees in music education, perhaps teaching at schools or universities. There seems to be more of a clear track in terms of pursuing a career in classical music. Help me understand the challenges for guitar. I mean, a contemporary guitarist playing cover music. Tell me what life was like when you first fell in love with the guitar and how you pursued your studies, and then perhaps even talk about what you were facing right after you're getting ready to graduate. What did you do?
Well, I think probably a good analogy would be that classical music is like Europe. It's got a long tradition. People follow particular tracks of career paths. There are established laws and so forth. Whereas in the guitar is very much the Wild West, especially when I was growing up. It's becoming more, should we say, civilized, or it's not as wild as it once was. But if you go back to, and I'm not talking about classical guitar, I'm talking about popular rock guitar. If you go back to the Jimi Hendrix days, the early Led Zeppelins and these kind of groups, this was all very new. These guys were breaking ground. And there's that classic statement that came from Decca Records about the Beatles, where the head of Decca said, "Guitar music is on the way out." And
Huh.
that was back in the 50s, right? They were predicting guitar music had had its day and it was all over, but it was yet to come as
Mm.
we everybody saw. So for me, I started learning drums at about age 13. Then I went on and I dabbled in guitar, and then I started seriously learning guitar at around 17 years of age. And the teacher that I had was fantastic. He was a combination of jazz, pop, rock player, and he sort of set me up, if you like, to become a professional guitarist at the time. So having him mentoring me was a big part of it. I wouldn't have, and it's not like the classical world where you go and do a course and study and then apply for jobs. In the popular rock world, it's like I said, it's kind of like the entrepreneur. It's the person setting up their shop opposed to the person going to university and applying for jobs within a company. So I think that might be a good analogy where for us, it was about finding work. We would, my brother was the singer, I was the guitarist, and we would literally go out and network and talk to people about how can we get a gig? How can I play here? How can we play there? And we found an agent. I remember when I was about 17, and that's really the professional career. And I came from it from reverse, if you like, in that I started I had formal drum lessons. Then I spent a period self-teaching on guitar. Then I had guitar lessons, and then I was playing live. I was even playing drums live, like in bands from as young as 14. But the guitar side of the career didn't come into play until I was about 17, 18. I'd only been playing less than a year when I started playing professionally as a guitar player.
That's pretty awesome.
I was very overconfident. The same with the teaching. I got in very early on the teaching. I'd only been playing for a year and a half, and I started teaching other people how to play.
I think I'm playing the wrong instrument. Good grief.
I hardly knew my own way around the guitar, let alone, and there I was. But yeah, it's that naive, I know it all, teenager stage. So
well,
that was pretty well how it all started.
It's interesting you mentioned the relatively quick startup time. Now, I've actually heard this in other instruments where some people have been able to learn their instruments incredibly quickly and then actually start to get jobs after just a few short years. Whereas with some instruments like the piano, the violin, it's at least 10, 12 years of rigorous training before you can even hope to be adequate,
Yes.
much less win a job.
Very, very different standards.
So,
yes.
Tell us a little bit about what you learned about getting gigs. So, what were some of the tips and tricks that you learned as you were trying to network and hustle and find work, find gigs that paid?
Well, I guess I was fortunate because my mother was an entrepreneur. She owned shops selling bedroom wear, which I learned very early. My grandmother, my grandfather, we had a lot of entrepreneurs in our family. So I kind of saw this all going on as I grew up. And I was fortunate in that really my first business was selling newspapers when I was 7 years of age. I started very young working. I'd sell newspapers in the local area. Then I went on and did other things. So I was an entrepreneur very early, and I guess that was just from watching my family. And it seemed to me, as kids do, they mimic their adult parents who are doing business. So you want to kind of get involved and do it. So I was very lucky in that respect. Now, as far as getting gigs, my brother, who's a year and a half older than me, he still is. He plays live around Australia, and he's a singer. He's also on TV. He works for Fox Sports, so he's a presenter. He's a fantastic frontman, great guy. Now, even before he could sing. He's a great singer now, but even before he really had the skills of singing. Even before I really had the skills of a guitar player, we were up there trying to get gigs and do it all. So we were kind of entrepreneurs first before we were even musicians. The music was something we loved, which came really from my father because my father loves music, and he was the whole he was born in the 40s. He hit the rock and roll period right on. He's the same age as the guys like the Rolling Stones, the Beatles. That's my father's age. So we were listening to records. He didn't want TV in the house. We had no TV for a long time. And so we grew up listening to the bands of the day, the rock and roll. I was born in the 60s. So anything from the 60s, 70s. onwards, and then I came into my own in about the 80s. So we had the music in us. We loved the music. That was a big part of who we were as a family. And then that was on my father's side. On my mother's side, we had the entrepreneur, and that sort of bring the two. So how do we get gigs? Sorry to answer your question, the
Yeah, yeah.
long-winded answer here. How do we get gigs? My stepfather happened to be in the Australian rock and roll industry. He didn't actually work in it, but his best friend was very well connected. And these are the guys who, if you think about AC/DC, which most people know, the Young brothers, the older brother of Angus Young, and his older brother, sorry, is called George Young, and he was part of a group called the Easy Beats. And they were really the first Australian band back in the 60s, 70s who went to the US, which was a big deal in those days, to go to the US and break the US. They had a #1 song in the US called, I think it's called Friday on My Mind or something like that. And that was a big deal. So they were a huge success. They came, and obviously they came back to Australia, and they started a record company under Vanda and Young, who were the two of the members. And those guys went on to really be the groundwork for AC/DC and quite a lot of other very successful bands. So he had those connections with them. We were able to do things like sit in. We would go to this was when I was a young teen. I would be able to sit in with this particular guy who had his band, and I would play the drums. And he had a lot of these guys who would come off tour, and they would come and play in his band. He was kind of like the resident. He himself wasn't that famous, but he was famous among musicians in rock bands, the rock and roll scene at the time, which was very rough and ready, I would say. It was like very connected to almost the bikies and the underground world. It was a very rough scene at that time. But we were teenagers. We thought it was cool. We were able to get up on stage and play and perform, and that's where it all started for us. So.
Wow. So let's skip forward a few years after being in the professional scene. You started to discover your passion for teaching. How did that get started? And what was it? Just one-on-one teaching, or were you teaching at a school? How did that begin?
My first experience with teaching was my brother's girlfriend at the time had a little brother who wanted to learn drums. And I was learning the drums at the time. I'd been doing it probably for about a year and a half. And he saw me, and he was probably about 9 or 10, and I was about 14, 15. And he said, "Oh, it'd be so cool if I could learn the drums." And so his sister said that her mother will pay me to teach him.
How about that?
And I was like, "Oh, okay. That sounds good." So I said, "Sure." And what I charged him was probably next to nothing. I can't even remember, but I did it, and that was really a kind of a introduction to the world of teaching. And because my drum teacher, he was a big influence on me as well. Great teacher, really well organized, and just a great mentor for me at that time. And then I went on, and my guitar teacher, he became really the biggest inspiration for me as far as teaching, because, again, he was an incredible teacher, just inspired. And he produced so many great students. Even with my years of teaching and my years of experience and studying it and understanding it, I still see my particular teacher as having that gift. He had that ability to transfer his skills and inspiration to other people. It is a rare gift, and he was still to this day my greatest mentor as a guitar teacher.
Now, you actually went on to not just teach, not just gig, but you actually started your own music school, the first guitar school in Sydney, Australia, in 1987. That's remarkable. Tell us a little bit of what that first school looked like.
Okay, well, it was a bit of an evolution. What I did is, I guess, again, I got the inspiration for where my guitar teacher taught, and he was teaching at a local music shop, but they sort of built into a school, and the school really became the main part of their business. And so I had that model in my mind already. And what I did was I started teaching at home, and the way that I did it was I advertised in the local newspaper, guitar lessons, and I also did some flyers. I went around and put them in people's letterboxes, which we can do in Australia. And it sort of grew slowly at first. but I was also had been working in retail sales, and because of my entrepreneurial and family background, I had a lot of experience in sales. And I'd worked for a company at that time. This was about 18, 19, and I'd even done some sales training through them, but I'd become the number one salesperson in that company, which was a big company. They had over 1,000 salespeople across Australia, and here I became their there was another couple of guys who, to be fair, I wasn't the only number one. There were a couple of other guys, and we'd sort of take turns at being, for that particular week or month, the number one.
What were you selling?
It was consumer electrics, so televisions, videos, DVD players, audio, anything to do with that kind of consumer electric side of life.
And was it
Yep.
literally being one of those people that stand in the store, meet you at the store, say hello, and sell you a TV?
Exactly. Yeah. I think in the US it's like a Best Buy. Is that what you call them in
Sure,
the
we have,
US?
yes, yeah, we have Best Buys currently.
Yes.
And
Yes.
you have people in blue vests come up to meet you, and just they're very helpful, and maybe you'll buy something through them. So that's
Yep.
interesting. I mean, what made you number one? What were some of the secrets that I'm seeing if I can uncover
Yes.
all these interesting secrets about you? You seem to have this incredible track record for success in various pursuits. What were some of the things that you think helped you to become the number one salesman? Because that's not an easy title to land, especially for somebody who is primarily known for their music.
Yeah. 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 And I would say that what gave me the ability to be number one at times was the fact that I learned very early. The first book that I read, and really the message here, if you like, is that I kept studying the best people. I looked at who knows who has the information that I need to be able to become the best at what I do. And at that point, it was sales and customer service. And I found this book, and I recommend it to anyone to read. It was called Customer Service: The Ultimate Weapon. Now, I love reading. I read about two business books a week, whether it be business or coaching or something related to personal development. So I read a lot. I've read hundreds of books on the topic. But this particular book was at that time when I was quite young, and I read it in Customer Service: The Ultimate Weapon. And basically what it said is that customer service generally everywhere you go is pretty poor. And the reasons are blah, blah, blah. But cut a long story short, when I read this book, it was almost like a religious experience. It's like, wow, this is the secret. I can actually
Hmm.
be really good. And the underlying message was that go overboard, over deliver.
Hmm.
Don't treat customers in a way that where you're only going to give what they give. In other words, if they pay $100, you're going to stop at $100 worth of what you consider service. The idea is to over deliver, to shock people. Now, some people will take advantage of you, but other people will just be blown away by that over delivery of service, and then they'll spread the word. And a good example is there's a company in the US called Zappos, which
Sure.
were you've heard of Zappos, right? And they were bought by Amazon for $1.2 billion, I think, which is a big price for a business. And the way they built the business, and the guy who did it, who he's I'm trying to remember his name, but anyway, he Vietnamese American guy, and anyway, he built, and he played violin too, by the way. Um, but he built up the business based on this ultimate customer service idea. Not that he read that particular book, but he over delivered. So he did things like he would send shoes, like multiple pairs of shoes, out to people, because this is where they started selling shoes. And if people didn't, and then they could send back the other shoes that they didn't like, or they could send them all back. They would pay for the freight both ways. And this was kind of, over delivering, 365-day return policy. So after a year, if you still don't like the shoes, you can send them back. All this incredible
Wow.
returns, and a lot of it that's taken for granted in business these days, especially online, where people really over deliver on refunds and so forth. Yeah. So that was the idea: is just go over and above what everyone else is prepared to do. Give service beyond what everyone. Now that's one side of it. I'll also add that I played the 80-20 rule, which I'm sure you're aware of, and that's to focus on, the 20% that gives you 80% of the return. So in other words, just one example, which is probably the best example I can give, is that most of the guys working in retail where I was, they didn't like answering the phones. It was like, oh, I've got to answer the phone. They wanted the customer in the shop because they thought that's where they get the business from. So I took the job of always answering the phone because no one else really wanted to do it. And they loved the fact that I did that. But they didn't realize that people on the phone were often more serious buyers than people who were just walking in off the street. And so I was taking the phone and I was selling them on the phone, and people were coming in all the time asking for me. And the other guys were like, why does everyone ask for you? What's your secret? Well, I answer the phones. So yeah, so that's playing the 80. That's one example of the 80-20, but there are many examples. So.
Now, I'd like to shift to the other side of the coin, because I think as musicians, we are of the mindset that we try to over-deliver in our performances. In our art, we try to be, we try to wow our listeners, wow our audience with our music. And strangely enough, we almost have a hard time expecting to get paid for it. We just think that the music is just good enough on its own. We hope that we'll just be, quote unquote, discovered because we are so amazing. What's wrong with that model? Why does this not work for the musician? And in a sense, who is constantly over-delivering, trying to be perfect with their runs and their scales and writing the perfect song and pouring their passion into their work in one sense. And yet it doesn't really, for most musicians, result in a livable wage. What's wrong here?
Well, the problem is that we are people, and our audiences are people, and people are emotional, and people are biased, and so when it comes to if you want to put it in these terms, you're always auditioning. No matter what you're doing, what performance you are, you're always auditioning. So you might say, well, I'm not auditioning. I'm in this orchestra. I'm a fixture of this orchestra. No. Every time you perform, you're auditioning. They're deciding whether or not they're going to keep you on for another season or another concert, whatever. And yeah, you might have a fairly solid position in your current job, but generally there are other people vying for your position if it's worth having. So yeah, this idea that you're judged purely on your music is rare. And there's a great example in the classical world of where they had a panel, and maybe you can relate to this, Hugh, but there was this period in music in the US where and this is unfortunately a little bit of racism, but where they believed that Asian musicians didn't have the feeling that the Western musicians had. The Asians were very technical. Sorry if you might hear that jet.
That's fine.
Past.
Yeah, that's fine.
It's like an
ambience.
F-11 or something. They're doing their training.
Very cool.
So anyway, they made this statement that that Asian musicians, they had the technical stuff down brilliantly, but they didn't have the feel. They didn't have that side of the music. And that was not uncommon when I was a kid to believe that Asian musicians were superior in their technical ability, but they didn't have the feeling in their playing. Now, what they did is so when these auditions, inevitably the Asian musicians wouldn't get the jobs. They were giving the jobs to other people. Now, it wasn't that and they even looked at these people and they weren't actually racist. The people who were picking these musicians weren't racist, but they were biased in their idea of what they're thinking. And so what they did is there was this, and I think it all started with this celloist. I can't remember the exact details, but it was a celloist who, I think she was Japanese. And anyway, they auditioned them behind curtains because they wanted to see if this theory was true. And they let them audition behind curtains, and she won hands down for the job. And then they revealed that, hey, she's Asian. So the point is that we are judged, and it's not, I didn't want to use a kind of a race type style, but sure. It just shows you that there is judgment at play, and that when it comes to people and it comes to auditions, If there are other factors, if they're just judging you purely on your music, if that's all they hear a recording, then yeah. But let's be honest, that's rarely what you're being judged on. You're being judged, or sorry, the only thing you're being judged on, even by the best critics and the best musicians, they're still looking at, do I like this person? Have they got some charisma? Now that's the experts, and in most cases you're appealing to a broader audience of non-experts. So the entertainment value and the presentation and all that has a big part to do with it. So my message generally to anyone who is a musician is you need to think about the package, not just how good you can sit in your bedroom and become technically the greatest musician on the planet. And maybe there is a position for the greatest musician on any instrument, but generally speaking, you're going to be in amongst the pack, and you're going to be chosen based on the package. What kind of person are you? Are you easy to get along with? What are your musical tastes? These are all factors that come into auditions. And as I say, an audition is not just playing in a band or an orchestra. It's also playing in, it's also just appealing to a general audience.
It's interesting. I heard an anecdotal story from somebody who said that music schools should teach a course on how to hang out, how to get along with other people, how not to be a jerk, for lack of a better term.
Exactly.
And this person was saying, he as a musician would rather work with somebody with a little less ability, who maybe not their top of the game, but is more fun to be with, more easygoing, less difficult, less prima donna, than the absolute top musician who is into themselves and just a miserable person to be around. So how to hang would be a great course, I think, for musicians in all genres.
Beautiful. I love it. Essential learning for all musicians. If they want to make any money, they want to survive. Yeah.
And you kind of alluded to this too. It's this interconnectivity. It's not, as you said, not just your music, but also the networks, the relationships, the friendships, the people and even the willingness to do things that other people don't want to do to make genuine connections, like the example of what you did with the phone calls.
Yeah, exactly.
So tell us a little bit about this concept that you thought of in 2005, launching what's called the G4 guitar method. This is launched with your first school in Sydney that year. Tell us how this came about. It sounds like it's the result of 2 decades of teaching experience as well as school building experience, it seems.
Yeah, well, what happened was to lead up to that, I started back in, say, the 80s, when I first had my first school in 87. And then what happened from there is that I kind of learned a lot of lessons the hard way. And if I could go back and redo it, I would. But as you sort of progress, you look back and you go, well, at least I know it now. And so it got to this point where in the 90s, I had been teaching for about 10 years, and I felt that what was happening, by the way, was that I was being surrounded by classically trained musicians, whether they were pianists, violinists, and one of the big influences for me was a Suzuki violin teacher, and I used to teach her son guitar, and then what happened was that I would end up talking to her. I got to the point where I made sure there wasn't a student after him, so that I could chat to her, because she was great and she was always sharing, her experience, and she was the Suzuki violin teacher. Anyway, I think things like teaching kids from a very early age, having the structured program, teaching them, a lot of repetition on things like Twinkle Twinkle, and teaching them ear training and all these things that were like really a real eye openers for me at that time. And so I looked more and more into Suzuki, and I thought, this is great. This is a structured way of learning, and obviously the results are there. I looked up some of the stats on Suzuki violinists. Apparently, they occupy a very large percentage of orchestras around the world. So it's obviously a proven method of learn music. So that was really my first point of my first sort of introduction to having a method. But it still took me a number of years before I started to develop a method myself.
Mm.
And where it really came to light, the difference was I noticed a difference between guitar students. I had guitar teachers. I had a school of about 450 students at
Oh
that
my goodness.
in the 90s. Yeah, we had. I was really good at the front end on selling it. Right, I wouldn't even say it was a great school in terms of the musicians the learning. We had some good teachers, but that wasn't because of me. That was just because they were good teachers. But the school, I had the front end, the selling, the marketing, all that. So that was my strength. I could really bring in the numbers.
Wow.
But we had these guitar teachers, and I noticed the dropout rates were much higher with guitar teachers, and even just the general practice and success rates were very low with the guitar teachers. Where with some of the classical teachers we had, they were getting great results, and that's where it was almost like a lab test where I was seeing the difference between the two. So what was it about the classical musicians? The first thing was that most of them were doing exams. So by having these set goals that they were working towards, very clear goals. So I thought that's what we need. We need students to have goals. They can't just be learning a song changing songs every week just because they feel like it. And that's how most guitar teachers teach.
Ah.
So that was the first thing that I noticed. The other thing was that they tended to track practice. I found that most of the teachers, they had practice logs, and the students would write in how much practice they did. They would even, keep diaries sometimes on what they practiced. So there were very obvious differences between the two. And that's when I decided I need a method. I need to take what I'm learning from these guys and put it into a method.
Now, it's interesting because, on the surface of it, exams, logs, these are relative, at surface value, these are items of drudgery, tasks of drudgery, not the most exciting things as opposed to, hey, learn a song, hey, learn another song, and yet you are seeing counterintuitive results. The fun
Yep.
method, so to speak, resulted in a higher rate of dropouts, whereas the more painful, structured, disciplined method kept the students on. How fascinating.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it's a real contrast because we have this almost like there's two camps. It's almost like the political left and the political right. It's like the educated left thinkers and the educated right, and on one side we've got this idea that students and kids should just learn what they want when they like and how they like. So it should be fun and I understand that. I get that, and like most things, we're aiming for the middle. The other side of it is that we have this strict disciplinarian teacher who has a big stick and whacks you across the knuckles every time you make a mistake. Right? So we've got these two extremes. But I was in a position where I'd come from almost one extreme, but saw the other side. And I was sort of, okay, well, how can I bring it together so that they can actually enjoy it, but also get the benefits of a structured, almost disciplined way of learning with very clear outcomes. And so that was really the path of my career, was how to bring those elements together, the winning elements from both sides, if you like, into one. Yeah.
I want to get more into depth with the G4 guitar method that you came up with. But before that, if you don't mind, I want to backtrack just a little bit. 450 students in a music school. I know somebody right now currently who is just getting started and she wants to launch her own music school. She has spent several months kind of reaching out to local music teachers and schools, and is just having a really difficult time getting anybody interested in joining her school. How did you make it work for you? How were you able to grow your school to 450 students? What were some of the tips and tricks that you might give to this young, budding entrepreneur musician who has the ambition to start a school, but really doesn't know what to do?
I think you've got to start off with selling. And this is often a dirty word amongst musicians, if not the general population. We have this image of the salesperson being this sleazy, slimy, con artist that's just trying to take you for everything you can get out of you. And so we have to get over that. That's one of the things I learned very early, was to get over this stigma attached to the salesperson. A salesperson, and there's an old saying of the difference between a salesperson and a con artist, is a salesperson sells you what is good for you, what you need, and what's going to get you the result. Think of it like a doctor. You go to that doctor, they do some tests on you, they analyze you, and then they give you a prescription of what they think is best for you, or a course of action. That's the salesperson. That's the genuine salesperson. The con artist is someone who doesn't care what's best for you. They just want to get out of you whatever they can and give away the least amount that they can. One has got this kind of win-win approach, where the other has got a I win, you lose approach. And so if people can get over that, so they can sort of move past the idea that a salesperson is some kind of con artist, and understand that what a salesperson is, and we're all salespeople. Anyone who's a parent will know that a child is a salesperson. They're constantly trying to sell you on why they should have an ice cream or why they should stay up late.
Yep.
So it's a constant battle of negotiation. And the reason that a lot of parents struggle with that is just simply because they're not prepared for it. They don't understand that that's what we do, and that's how we get to places in life. You don't get things in life generally just because you want it. You've got to influence other people to either help you and you could be influencing a charity, you could be influencing members of a band to play the songs that you want to play, or go in a particular direction. So it's really about the power of influence. And to have a school and to want that school, it's not going to be enough just to be a great musician or be a great teacher. You have to be someone who is of great influence. You have to be someone that people will come to. I built my school, that 450 students, through that kind of ultimate customer service approach, if you like, where I just over-delivered with everybody who came in the door. And after a while, people they talk about you, that they also feed back to you. You build great relationships with people, and it comes down to the 80-20. So if I say that there are two principles that I run by, one is to over-deliver, and the other is to play the 80-20. And so in the case of the people who are coming in with me, students, parents, there was always a small percentage of parents who were very influential in the community, who would bring in lots of other students. And I'm sure you've experienced that, Hugh, yourself, where there are certain people who will refer a lot of business to you, where the 80% won't, the 20% will. And if we take it even further, there's generally 1 or 2% of your client base who will refer 80% of your students.
Can you give an example of how you over-delivered to get the people who are coming for lessons so excited and passionate about signing up for your school?
Yep. So for an example, if someone came in or rang me and said, hey, I'm interested in learning guitar, a typical guitar teacher will say, okay, do you have a guitar now? And the student will say, no, I don't have a guitar. They say, well, look, you'll need to buy yourself a guitar first, and then when you've got the guitar, give me a call back. We'll go for that. So they kind of, they don't offer anything beyond. So the person's problem often goes, because remember, what we're doing in business always is solving problems. That's what we do. And there's I think it was Peter Diamandis who said that the bigger problem you solve for the more people, the more money you're going to make. You know, Steve Jobs coming up with the iPhone solved the problem for a lot of people. So it's why he became very wealthy. So Uber, Airbnb, Google, these companies, they solve problems for a lot of people. So the more problems you solve for people, the more money you probably end up going to be making. So the idea is that, okay, when someone approaches you, what problem am I solving? And what the average person thinks, or a music teacher thinks, that the problem I'm solving is how to show this person to learn to play the instrument. But the reality is that's not the main problem you're solving. What you're solving is this person wanting to gain a new identity about who they are. In other words, it can often be that I want to add this to who I am. I want to be a musician. I love the idea of musician. So they often don't tap in to the person behind the person who wants to learn the instrument, say learn guitar. Who is the person that wants to learn guitar, not just that they want to learn guitar. So To come back to answer your question about over delivering, is that when someone would inquire about guitar lessons, what I did instead, and if they didn't have a guitar, I said, don't worry about it. Come on down. I've got a guitar here you can use. Before you even buy a guitar, come down now. Have a look at the guitar that I've got. I'll explain to you how, and you can get a feel, and then you can decide whether. So the idea is to remove barriers, remove any hurdles, and get them straight to where they want to go as soon as possible. And that's the idea of having a method. A method removes barriers. It shows them the path, the steps that they need to take. And that's what people want. They want simple steps. If you put too many barriers, too many hurdles, then you're going to get a lot of resistance. And that's where most people fail generally in business, full stop. Create too many barriers for me, and I won't continue.
Thank you so much for that wonderful, wonderful lesson in entrepreneurship for musicians. Now, let's get back to the G4 guitar method. So as we were discussing earlier, you were seeing the pop guitar teachers struggling with keeping their students, and the classical teachers keeping their students with rigid discipline, and you were looking for something that could blend the fun elements and the discipline into something sort of in the middle. Tell us a little bit of what you came up with.
Okay. So the idea is that I took the structure and the discipline, if you like, of classical instruments and applied them to guitar. And it's something that I learned from a guy named Jay Abraham who talked about how if you want to revolutionize your own industry, go and look at another industry and take an idea that they're using and bring it across to yours. And we see that all the time. We see where one industry will completely transform. Look at the music industry as an example. Before Steve Jobs came along with iTunes, all the record companies were thinking in a particular way. They're always thinking about producing CDs and selling the CDs. Then Steve Jobs came along and said, yeah, exactly. And then look at what happened with Netflix and the movie business. Had blockbuster videos all over the place. Netflix took the idea of memberships, like almost a gym membership, but an online membership, and then pay a membership fee, and then you can watch as many movies as you like. So we see this where they take these ideas and they bring them across to a different industry. So in a sense, I wasn't going out of the music learning business, but I was going out of the guitar, Wild West cowboy style of teaching, and bringing across the disciplines of that. And even though, and sometimes it's the least expected, or the ones that you think are going to be met with the greatest disdain. So what I did was I took those disciplines, but then I realized that I also need to sell it. So the idea is that you can have the disciplines in place. And I would take the same idea across to classical musicians and teachers who are trying to just have a strict kind of disciplinary way of teaching. I would say you can have those disciplines, but you can do it in a nice way. And the idea is that we connect what we're doing. In other words, I need you to practice this scale 100 times a day on a really slow metronome speed. And that, for most students, that's boring and frustrating, and they just want they want to cut their wrists. But when you connect it to the song and to the goal and where they're going, then it makes a bigger difference. So yourself, right? You can take a couple of simple notes. Let's just take 3 or 4 notes, and you can say, I want you to practice these notes, blah, 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 blah. I want you to do it 100 times. That student will think, boring. Yeah. I hate this. I don't want to do it. But take those same notes and now apply it to a song they love and say, same notes. It's just now it has relevance for you. And so by hearing how those notes are applied, and you're not necessarily asking them even to learn the song, and this is the point that I make with G4, is we're not teaching you the songs. We're teaching you the skills required to play those songs. But what we're going to do at the same time is make those skills relevant and show you how that this boring old C scale is actually full of amazing ideas. You don't know how many great songs are within these 7 notes. You would be absolutely blown away. And let me give you some examples. And then they say, if you take something, in guitar, a common scale, the scale that most guitarists learn first up, is the pentatonic scale. Sure. So, or the blues scale, as adding the extra note in there. So so those notes, when you play that scale, that's those 3 notes. You go, guess what those first 3 notes are? smoke on the water, right? That's it.
Mm-hmm.
Just those three notes. Guess where the other notes come from? Again, they're all in the scale. There you go. There's your smoke on the water. And there's lots of more surprises and treats to come out of that scale. So practice the scale.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Very,
So
very cool.
that's how we do it.
I'm reading the synopsis of your method that you've identified 7 essential skills of guitar playing,
Yeah.
including picking, chords, arpeggios, scales, rhythm or strumming, reading, and aural. It's really interesting that you were able to distill the world of guitar playing into 7 essential categories, as it were. Was it very difficult to come up with those ideas, those concepts?
I think originally because I've done a lot of education myself through, and I'm not talking about traditional education so much, which I've done some of, but I'm talking more about the, if you like, self-development, business development, these courses where you will, your Tony Robbins, your Stephen Covey's, etc. And they use, and these guys have done a lot of research to come up with what they do, and they know what works because they've tested a lot of ideas. But what they tend to do is they come up with lists, and that's why you would know yourself that the most popular blogs are always the ones where seven good ways to lose weight, or 3 tips for becoming a great musician. So there are these kind of magic numbers that people work. So I knew that you needed a list, you needed a bunch of numbers that would break things down, because the reason it works is it simplifies things. People can actually digest that there are 7. We talk about food groups, or even if you look at music scales, why do we have 7 notes? Diatonic scales, right? Why do we have pentatonic scales? 5, 7, 12. These numbers are quite significant. So the idea is that with numbers and easy digestible numbers, 7 days in a week, 12 months in a year, we get it's just easier for us as number-based people to grasp something in those terms. So that's why the 7 skills. And originally I started with 5 skills, and then I added the other 2, realizing that we needed the extras. And that's kind of where it went. So the idea was, as you know, we could have 100 skills, and there are more and more that could come. Especially on guitar, there are so many different techniques that we can apply to guitar, but that will overwhelm a beginner student. So let's just stick with 7.
Now, what's really fascinating is that you developed this method, and now this is an international standard. We have 50 locations in Australia, Canada, Ireland, Japan, the UK, and the United States. This is incredible. In a sense, you've created this method and a franchise, helping other entrepreneurial musicians open up their own schools using your method. Tell us a little bit, how in the world did you get other teachers to adopt your method? Because I'm just going to relay from what I know of piano teachers. They can be very defensive, at least of what I've seen, and very territorial. And a method is always viewed with great suspicion, and it takes a lot to win over an established musician to say, try this method, and much less, to adopt your ideas into their teaching, because a lot of teachers personalize their own quote unquote method, even if it's not organized. How were you able to convince your first protege, so to speak, to adopt the way that you were able to codify these guitar lessons?
Well, the original, and I come back to the idea of cross-pollinating, if you like. In other words, going back to their idea of taking something from a different industry and bringing it across to our industry. And that's kind of been my whole thing of innovate. And the idea within the music, the business or teaching education business, is that you've got all these independent guitar teachers or music teachers generally, and there's not a lot of networking going on between them. Now, there are some methods. Suzuki's been very successful. Yamaha have been successful, but as a general rule, we don't see a lot of evidence of any kind of networking, especially on an international level. And so yet I saw it in other industries, and the idea of selling my method or system or getting someone on board, the original, funnily enough, inspiration that came for it was through, well, Suzuki was a part of it, seeing that how they worked. But then I saw other things like Kinder Music, which was doing really well. And so there's a lot of, I started to see a lot of evidence. But originally, the getting over those barriers, because it is hard in the beginning, was the story of Colonel Sanders and KFC, right? And I'm not endorsing KFC. It's up to you if you like that. But the business behind it, and now a lot of people don't know the story behind him, but very quickly is that he retired when he started selling his recipe. He was I think 60 or something at that time, but he basically retired. He got his first Social Security check, and it was like, well, where do I go from here? But he had his chicken recipe, and he went knocking on restaurants and saying, hey, I've got this great chicken recipe. And obviously the response generally, as he noted, was, who do you think you are? You think your recipe's better than mine? And I've had that. I've had people say to me, who the hell do you think you are? Who are you telling me how I should teach guitar?
Yeah.
So, yeah, well, I know how you feel. I would probably feel the same way if someone came knocking on my door. So I've got a better way to learn. But Colonel Sanders ended up going to over 1,000 restaurants before he got a taker. Right? So it took him a long time to get one person just to sign on.
Wow.
But once he had the first one, it was easier to get the second one, and so forth. And this is the story of the entrepreneur is about rejection. It's about taking rejection after rejection until you start to get a green light. And that's, you read about any successful person, it's always the same story. It's a whole bunch of rejections with a final, yes. Very rarely did I knock on the first door and go, hey. And sometimes that does happen. There are times when their first knock on the door, they get a big break and away they go. But often their success doesn't last, because as soon as they get a rejection further down the road, which is inevitable, they get crushed, and they don't go on with it. So the kind of the first thing there is that you need to stick to what your plan is and where you're going to go. And how I did it was, okay, well, it's going to be hard to knock on people's doors or go to other guitar teachers and say, hey, use my method. So I actually decided the best way to do it is to prove that it works first before. And so I started the school all by myself, and I did the teaching, and I had the method, and I put it through. But I was not only, proving in the sense that it worked, I was also iterating it, because it was in its very early stages. And just like software, again, taking it from the software industry, everything's in beta, right? If you look at Google and, Microsoft, and, people complain about the bugs that are in Microsoft or the problems with Google, etc. But these guys are in beta. They're always improving their things by putting it out to the audience or the users, and getting the users to sort of make comments and what they want or what they don't want. And so that's what I did with the method. I put it out there, allowed the users, who were the students, to feed back, and then iterate it until it got to the point where, yes, we're 95% there. This really works and works really well. That's when I then I wanted to prove that it could be replicated, as you should do in any scientific experiment. So I opened a second location, worked just as well. I opened a third location. Again, I opened a fourth location, and then a fifth location. And so I've proven that it works now. So the next step now is to move towards the network and franchisees. And so what I did is I started with the teachers who were already within my network, and I said, hey, would you like to be a franchise? And so the first franchise is a guy named Michael Essery, who's in Adelaide now. He started in Australia in a suburb called Penrith. He was great. He went really well, and then he went and opened another one in Adelaide.
Wow.
And now I've got, as they started to open, other people who I did through marketing, obviously, getting people interested and sending them out information about G4, and then getting them on like a Skype chat and explaining to them. But I didn't sell it, and maybe this will help your listeners, is I didn't sell it as, hey, the G4 method is the greatest thing on the planet. I would never say that. I always started with the fact that I'm not saying that G4 is better than what you do. What I'm saying about G4 is that we're a community, we're a group. So if you use G4, then you we want your input. We want you to say what you like and don't like about it, or what do you do that's better. And the idea is, rather than you working alone and as an isolated music teacher, which is what most music teachers do, you get to be part of a network of 50 other teachers, or when we started 5, say, who are all inputting their ideas. And as we bring in more members, then we're developing this all the time. And it's unlike your own method, which is just based on your own worldview. Having a method where you've got lots of teachers around the world inputting, it's going to develop a lot faster. It's going to be, on steroids as far as development is concerned. So that was the principle behind selling the G4 method, was that it wasn't just about a method, but it was about being part of a group where you get to help develop it with us.
One of the things I just want to close off with my observations on the back end of the G4 method, franchise operations, so to speak. You were very gracious to let me look at what it's like if I were to sign up as a teacher. And not only do I have access to the teaching core materials, but you actually have a full in-depth course on how to market, how to become a business, how to purchase ads, how to purchase ads on Facebook or YouTube or Google ads. I couldn't believe the amount of detailed information that you were sharing for the franchisee on how to become successful, all the tools they need. And this would apply to almost any business, but of course applied to the G4 method. That's incredible. I'm not sure that the folks who are interested in franchising realize how much useful material they go beyond just these great teaching materials.
Yeah, and the biggest complaint I get, if there is a main complaint, is that they're overwhelmed with the amount of information. So whoa, and because it's not, as you say, there's the business training and the method itself, but there's also extensive teacher training, on how to teach successfully. And one of the things that I find that's a little bit ironic within teaching, music teachers, not just music teachers but teachers generally, is the fact that they are not acting as students. In other words, the great majority of teachers don't have a teacher. They don't actually go to someone who teaches them how to become a better teacher. And among music teachers, the majority of them, especially in the guitar world, I wouldn't say so much in the classical world, because a lot of the classical teachers do have education degrees. So, but but as far as ongoing, a lot of them don't do that. And you look in other industries, they're always having conventions. They're always having, I'm in, if you like, in the online entrepreneurial industry. That's part of what I am. So I'm, several times a year I go to conventions where all we talk about is how to become better online marketers, or improve our websites, or all that side of it. And that's just one part of what I do. I also do, which I'll just add on top of what you're saying there, is what we call the student management app. And that's a sophisticated app built on FileMaker, which does everything from manage the teachers' classes, their students, to printing certificates, to tools that they can use to do reports on how much profit they're making based on how many students they've got. Everything. The idea is to make their business run efficiently, and the same as the method has been designed to learn efficiently, and the teacher training designed to teach efficiently. The app is designed to operate their business efficiently. So and I will say that this is all possible because we do have a lot of members who all pay and contribute, and so then I can use the profits that I make to further my education and to further the sophistication of what we do. So it builds on itself. So that's really what excites me, is the fact that we're a community, and the money that's coming into the community is a large portion of it is fuel back into the community to make us better and improve our tools and operation, giving us both a competitive advantage, but also giving us a better experience as teachers and entrepreneurs.
I think it's pretty remarkable that you, if you don't mind me sharing this as part of the teacher training, if they work through all the business aspects, you tell them that they can expect to make a six-figure income. that's
Yep,
that's
absolutely.
pretty amazing if they're willing to stick with all the material that they need to learn. Now, just as a closing question, through the 50 satellite schools that you have in different countries, do you know approximately how many students you are influencing through these schools?
We know that the average teacher has 50 to 100 students.
Okay.
That's the average. Some of them have got, I think the highest that we've got is got about 200 in his school. And so, yeah, so that if you times that by 50, the average, we're talking 3 to 5,000
Hmm.
students are currently learning G4. As far as those who've been touched by G4 in one way or another, we're talking tens of thousands, because we also have a lot of students who learn online. So they don't go through the school because they're not near one of our schools. They actually just join our online program, which is nothing like learning in one of our schools, of course, but it's that makes it available to people out there, and that becomes an added benefit for our members, because those people who do use the method, that the word kind of starts to spread. So this is and I can talk hours about this, but I'll keep it short. But the idea of a network is that we have these 50 teachers out there who are marketing, who are promoting, who are selling, teaching G4. So it's like when you run your own business, you're an independent guitar teacher or music teacher. You have to do all that yourself. You're pushing your name out there all by yourself. Whereas when you have this network of people out there, we've got hundreds and hundreds of testimonials from students. We've got thousands and thousands of web pages and listings all around the place, and this is because of the number of members that we have and the number of students that we have. So it's just a lot louder. The message out there about who we are and what we do is a lot louder compared to that individual music teacher working from their single studio in some suburb somewhere in the world.
These teachers no longer have to struggle by themselves. There's actually help. There are
Yes.
resources. There's a community. David, thank you so much for giving us this absolutely fascinating insight into the business of education, the business of growing a school and touching thousands and thousands of lives with the joy of playing the guitar. Thank you so much for being so generous with sharing your knowledge and accumulated wisdom.
My pleasure, Hugh, and thank you for having me on. Yeah, it's great. We've sort of known each other a little while now, and and we're learning and sharing, and this is what it's all about for me. It's about connecting with other people, and really what we're doing here, you and I, is the basis, I think, to success as an entrepreneur, is to connect with other people in the
Absolutely.
business.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Thank you so much, David.
my pleasure. Great talking to you, Hugh.
For links to David's G4 Guitar Method website, visit the show notes at amusicallife.com. While you're there, be sure to sign up for our newsletter to get the latest updates on future episodes. You can also subscribe to A Musical Life through iTunes or with your favorite podcast playing app, and get new episodes automatically downloaded onto your smartphone, tablet, or computer. If you enjoy these stories about making music and the things that move our souls, please tell a friend about this show and consider posting a short review on iTunes at amusicallife.com/review. Thank you for your support. Until next time, I'm Hugh Sung, and I wish you a musical life.